The following reading is from Rays of the One Light, Weekly Commentaries on the Bible and Bhagavad Gita by Swami Kriyananda. The Infinite Christ. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. The Gospel of St. John contains some of the most profound spiritual teachings in the Bible. In the first chapter, many subtle truths are suggested concerning higher states of self-realization. Here, John the Baptist is described as one reaching up toward that high state. He was not that light, the Gospel tells us, but was sent to bear witness of that light. Jesus Christ, by contrast, is described as the light itself. That was the true light, which lighteth every man that cometh into the world. He was in the world, and the world was made of him, and the world knew him not. One essential truth stands out in this teaching, that Jesus came not to dogmatize people with a new teaching, but to bring them timeless, universal truths. Disciples saw the Master clothed in human form, and therefore judged him in terms of his greatness relative to the greatness of other teachers. Wisdom, however, sees the Master's very greatness in terms of a cosmic unity. There is a passage in The Path by Swami Kriyananda in which this point is emphasized. The Master Paramahansa Yogananda explained, "The saint who attains that exalted consciousness never says, 'I am God,' for he sees it was the vast ocean that became his little wave of ego." The wave, in other words, would not claim, when referring to the little self, to be the ocean. At this juncture, Debbie, who was present, cried excitedly, "But sir, if you are one with that ocean, that means you are God." "Why, I," Master said, "say he is God." "But still, sir, you are one with him, and he is the only reality. That means you, too, are God." "But this body isn't God." "You aren't identified with your body, sir. So one may still say that you are God." "Well, in that case, why do you say you? You too are that." In a discussion of this sort, it is less confusing if we say he. "But what's the difference?" "The scriptures say," Master began. "It's only your humility, sir," Debbie broke in, "that makes you distinguish between yourself and him." "How can there be humility when there is no consciousness of ego?" Triumphantly, Debbie cried, "But if you have no ego left, that means you are God." Master laughingly continued the earlier statement which Debbie had interrupted. "The scriptures say, 'He who knows Brahma becomes Brahma.'" "There," cried Debbie, "you said it yourself." Master rejoined, still laughingly, "I didn't say it. It's the scriptures that say so." Master, in other words, would not identify those words with the human body speaking them. It was in his overarching spirit that he saw himself one with the infinite. But Debbie wasn't able to make this mental leap from a pure expression of infinity to infinity itself. "You quoted those scriptures, sir," he reminded Master relentlessly. "That means you agree with them." Recognizing that the distinction was perhaps too subtle for many to grasp, Master concluded, "Well, he who says he is God isn't God." And he added, with a smile, "He who says he isn't, isn't." And there the subject rested amid general laughter. The greater a spiritual teaching, the more greatly we betray it by particularizing it with dogmas. Truth itself, not the Christian truth or the Hindu truth, incarnates on earth with the birth of a fully liberated Master. As the Bhagavad Gita teaches in the 4th chapter, "Unborn, changeless Lord of creation and controller of my cosmic nature, though I am, yet entering nature I am dressed in the cosmic garment of my own Maya. O Bharata, whenever virtue declines and vice predominates, I incarnate on earth. Taking visible form, I come to destroy evil and re-establish virtue." Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind.
morning, everybody. I just wanted to actually had a couple of books, but I narrowed it down to one. So I have the other one up there, but I don't think I'll need it. I'll just be reading from one book today. But anyway, I just wanted to start with, I hope you all kind of got that reading. It's sometimes a little harder to get than others, but I think we all kind of chuckle a little bit with Devi Mukherjee in that story about Master, because how can we really relate to the consciousness of a saint? That's not something that most in our human form we're able to really understand. Maybe intellectually we have some ideas, but we can't really know that consciousness of a saint, which of course Master was a great master, a great saint. And he had a consciousness that, he can talk about, that he could allude to, but, it was really hard to understand what that consciousness really was. We can call it God consciousness. They call it nirvikalpa samadhi. There's words, but, that really doesn't do it, does it? We need to have an experience in order to really know something. So we do our best to understand what that consciousness is. And so, I puzzled over this because, I like to know things. I like to experience things. The intellect doesn't function that way with me at all. So, and I just found this wonderful passage in this Conversations with Yogananda book. I was on seclusion this last week, and I had a chance to really spend some time with the great masters. And this passage says it to me probably better than I've ever heard it described before. What is cosmic consciousness? What is that divine presence that is within us and that we're moving towards in our spiritual journey, and which we will merge into that consciousness when we're ready? And that's the destiny. That's our birthright as being a child of God. And it's such a lofty concept, or lofty reality, that it sometimes makes you chuckle with people trying to understand it, including oneself. So listen to this description. And again, Conversations with Yogananda is Swami Kriyananda, a direct disciple who lived with our guru Yogananda for 3.5 years at his ashram in Mount Washington, was told by Yogananda to write down everything I say. And Swami, being, very much a devotee, did so, and he also has a wonderful mind himself, so he remembered things very well. And so he wrote down some wonderful advice and sayings and stories that happened this time there. So if you haven't read this, I highly recommend it. This particular passage is actually Swami Kriyananda telling it in his own words. He says, I think the following is a fairly exact explanation of the Master's teaching on this subject of cosmic consciousness. He says, in cosmic consciousness, you are inwardly conscious of everything. Your human mind, however, must be aware of things specifically. When you yourself concentrate on one flower out of several of them, then although you are aware of that one flower especially, you are also aware that there are others. You see those others there, but to your present awareness they are peripheral. The case is similar in the case of a master. He is aware of everything, everywhere, but at the same time, whatever calls for his specific human attention, since it is in his direct line of vision, he addresses particularly. His human mind functions in a human way. Inwardly, however, his inner consciousness embraces all existence. So the master is in this human body, and yet his consciousness is expansive. It's everywhere. And yet he can be in that human mind when the attention is needed to be in that human mind. And I just love that picture of flowers. I mean, we could all look at a bouquet of flowers and be aware of all of them, but if suddenly a little bee landed on one particular flower, all of our attention would be probably on that little bee. We'd be watching it, and yet we'd be aware of all the other flowers and everything else going on in the room. So a master is able to take that human consciousness and particularize it as needed, that tuning in, and yet he's still aware. He's circumference nowhere, center everywhere. And that one in particular, intellectual concept particularly, is kind of mind-blowing, but it makes more sense now. Center everywhere, circumference nowhere is that definition. So Jesus was a saint, and of course he had a human body, and so back in those days in particular, how would they have related to him? Of course, they would see him as a human body with a human mind, and they wouldn't, and they see him as a son of a human, of man. He was born of woman. And yet there are some of those great souls that have a higher consciousness. There's a whole spectrum of consciousness. And the higher souls that have a higher sense of consciousness could relate to the fact that he was more than that human body. He was, as it says in this reading, he was the light. And his disciples, of course, could see that he was actually that consciousness of God in the human body. And John the Baptist, they talked about here in particular, again was a great soul, and he came first to herald the coming of Jesus Christ, because he himself hadn't quite achieved that state of oneness with the divine. He hadn't quite achieved that conscious cosmic spirit that the masters that reunite their little consciousness, their ego consciousness with divine consciousness have. But John the Baptist was a great soul, and he recognized the light of Jesus, and he recognized the greatness of Jesus' soul. So, because Jesus had no ego, and that's the difference. John the Baptist still had a little touch of that ego, and yet he was very much in tune with that. It takes greatness to recognize greatness, and which means, as your consciousness rises, you begin to tune in to other people on kind of the same wavelength, because our consciousnesses are very real. And so we like to be around people of a similar wavelength. And you can kind of tell when somebody's wavelength isn't quite what yours is. Swami Kriyananda, as I said, our founder of Ananda, he, as a young child, spent his whole growing up years, his college years, his young adult years, searching for truth. He just couldn't find it. He couldn't find it in colleges. He tried several different colleges, professors, where you'd think you'd go to find the answers to things. And yet it wasn't there. It wasn't that kind of an answer he was looking for. And yet when he picked up the Autobiography of a Yogi, the book written by Yogananda, he said it was like he was coming home. He just held it to his chest, and tears of joy ran down his face, because he knew that this was truth, that this man that was writing this book knew truth, and that he could help him. And he said it was 3 days of bliss where he would just, nothing else. He hardly ate, he hardly slept. He just enjoyed this beautiful joy that he felt coming from the book. And of course got on the next bus and went to Los Angeles and interviewed with Yogananda and was accepted right there on the spot. His first words was, "I want to be your disciple." So it was greatness recognizing greatness. Swami Kriyananda didn't have cosmic consciousness, but he was looking for it. He was a sincere seeker, and he recognized that Yogananda had what it was that he was seeking. It's interesting how too many times we can misunderstand the help that can come to us. We can even sometimes reject it, because it doesn't always come in the form or in the way that we might expect it or we might want it. It sometimes is uncomfortable. So it's kind of a fun little example that I have to relate to this. You know, it can even be scary a little bit. Actually, it's scary quite a bit. But anyway, this little story goes like this, that there was an atheist, and he was walking in the woods. This was a wilderness where he was. He was a nice person, but he just had all his life not really believed in the divine. Anyway, he was enjoying the beautiful outdoors, the brook that was bubbling that he was following, and the birds were chirping in the trees. And anyway, it was wilderness, but it was still very beautiful and pretty at that place. And all of a sudden he heard this rustling sound behind him, and he whipped around, and there was this big old grizzly bear just charging him, coming at him real fast. And he was pretty savvy in the ways of the wilderness. He got down and covered himself, and the bear ended up plopping right down on top of him, and now he was getting pretty desperate. He goes, oh, he says, he just kind of had to do something, so he said, God, help me, God, help me. And lo and behold, everything stopped. You know, there was no noise at that point, there was no feeling, nothing, except this big light started to envelop everything that was there. And then he heard this voice, and this voice said, you called me? You have denied me. You've denied my existence for all these years, and you have told other people that you don't believe in me, and now you call me? Are you now a believer or something? And the atheist was kind of surprised, and he said, well, you know, you're right. I might be a hypocrite if I said that. He said, but would you please at least make this bear a believer? And God said, well, okay, if that's what you want. And he withdrew his light, and suddenly the man was aware of the sounds and the birds and the breeze, and he was aware of this heavy weight on top of him, and he looked up at this big bear, and lo and behold, the bear had his paws clasped together in prayer. And he had his head bowed, and the bear said, Lord, bless this food which I am about to take. Anyway, we do take God's advice when he gives it to you. You know, it usually comes with a reason, even though you're not maybe a believer in that sense. If God comes to you in the light and say, yes, I want it. Anyway, we don't have to worry about getting eaten by bears, but we do have our own little and big bears that can haunt us on our path, as we all know, because many of us have and are going through some of those extreme challenges that we have. Because following God takes a lot of courage, takes a lot of strength, takes a lot of intuitive sense and what to do and where to go and how to do it. It means changing. It means change. And for some people, like change better than others, but most of us don't like to change all those precious little things that we hold about who we are and what we like and what we want. You know, those are part of what we call our self-definitions. That's what Swami Kriyananda gave to this physical form and personality that we kind of have come into, and that it's our habitation for this lifetime. So we think about ourselves in certain ways, and you know, whether they're good or bad, we're comfortable with it. So we kind of don't like to change. But it does take change for most of us to achieve what it is we're really looking for, which is to be happy. We want that happiness to be sustained all the time. We don't want to have to go through the ups and downs, which is the guarantee. And that's why most of us are here, because we're getting tired of the ups and downs. We want that change to actually happen. I know there's a story somewhere in the teachings about this sculptor who has this big rock in front of him, and he's chipping away at it, and somebody comes by and say, well, what is this? And he says, oh, I'm making an elephant. And he says, really, an elephant? He says, well, well, how can you do that? And he says, well, I just chip away at anything that's not the elephant. And, you know, that's kind of what it feels like sometimes, that you're being chipped away at. You know, those little chips fall off, and you know, ouch, you don't want them. And you put them back on, but they don't, they fall off. They kind of hurt. But we want to become the elephant, or in this case, we want to become our divine birthright. We want to become that cosmic consciousness, which is that ever-new joy and that bliss that we're looking for. And there's a wonderful story in Jyotish and Devi, who are the spiritual leaders now of Ananda. They just wrote a book called Touch of Light. And it's just got marvelous, little book, but it's got marvelous stories in it. And I related to this one so well in terms of the struggle that we go through in this transition from the human consciousness to the divine consciousness. And it's about two little butterflies. And as you know, butterflies start off as caterpillars, and then they, after they're finished that part of their life, they have this chrysalis that they go into. If it's a moth, they have a cocoon. But these little hard shells that you probably have seen, and inside that shell, the transformation is going on. The butterfly, that caterpillar is somehow, that body is changing into a butterfly inside that chrysalis. A miracle just to think about it. And this family, this is a true story, the family was watching these butterflies as they were going to come out of their chrysalis. And the first one that came out, the family was watching it and, you know, saw that at first it kind of cut along the back of the chrysalis so that the butterfly could start to push his head out with great difficulty. And then he'd rear up and push his back out again. What a struggle. 30 minutes. This butterfly was struggling with one thing after another. Finally one wing came out, and then another wing came out. And then finally it kind of fell back, and all the little legs were there, and they're all kind of floppy because they hadn't hardened. And then he kind of stayed on the chrysalis as he was hardening. And then it was, they say, about 30 minutes or a little bit more. The butterfly kind of tested his wings, and then he flew away. And it was just one of those, I've seen this, so I'm speaking from my experience too, but you know, it's just such a wonderful experience to see that transformation process. But you know, we didn't do anything. It all happened somehow within. And then they watched this other chrysalis, and it started to shake, and so they were watching it. And the kids now, you know, they're getting a little impatient, I guess. And they said, well, you know, let's help him. Let's help him get out faster, you know, so he doesn't have to struggle so much, because they really struggle trying to get out of those cases. And so the parents, you know, very carefully cut the chrysalis a little bit so that he wouldn't have to struggle so much. And so the second butterfly popped out of his chrysalis quite quickly. And it kind of hovered and stood there, you know, and flopped a little bit, and then it flopped over and died. It didn't make it. And, you know, the lesson there was, you know, it does take a struggle. I mean, for all life to make some of these transitions and changes. And, you know, just like the butterfly, you know, we're in our little human cocoon cage, whatever that is, we've wrapped around ourselves over incarnations. And now you're on a spiritual path. Now you're seeking, so now you're starting to come out. Now that casement is letting go. And you can just feel, you know, sometimes, you ever feel it? Sometimes almost like you're letting it go. Things are falling off, you know, with the help of your divine teacher, whoever that is for you. For us, it's Yogananda, many of us that are here. The Guru is here to help us and sometimes these pieces that we're not even aware of, he helps to remove in the struggle to change into that beautiful butterfly, to change into that self, that spirit self that we truly are. It's right there for us. It's interesting that we talk about struggles and problems here a lot, but I just want to say that it's not always hard. And the other book, which I can just paraphrase, but the spiritual journey really is a series. It's a continuum. I guess that's the word. It's a continuum. And you know, when we first start the spiritual path, when you first start it, you sometimes get, frequently, you'll get this divine grace. It's kind of like the honeymoon period, there where you really will feel that presence, and you'll get a lot of help, and you'll dive into it with great eagerness. And then, as you continue, there's this, what we call the middle ground. And I don't know, in terms of the space, how long each one is on this continuum. But eventually we hit the middle ground. Now the middle ground is kind of where you're in that transition. You're not really, you're just breaking it out of that chrysalis, and that's kind of where we talk, the struggle seems to happen. And yes, there is effort. There is effort. There is, you have to work at it. I mean, nobody's going to say it's easy for most of us. But you have that memory of that grace, that honeymoon that you had, whatever some of those experiences might have been. And you know that that's what you want. And so you keep that yearning in your heart. And that's probably the most important thing, is whatever it is that helps you to feel that desire to go home to God, whatever that devotion in your heart can take you to do. For me, a lot of it was just being out in nature. But for some people it's music, whatever it is. And you just use that to kind of keep stirring up that devotion and that joy in your heart. And as that middle ground moves, and as you practice the teachings and the techniques that we've been given, especially of meditation, of stillness, God's grace starts to enter in. And I think, the seclusion that I just did, and that I've done many for over the 30 plus years I've been on this path, I get a sense of that kind of all in a little, it's all like all compacted. You get the little bit of grace and you start the seclusion, and then you struggle and struggle, and you really work hard to meditate deeply and, chant and really focus on God and the readings, and then the bliss, you start to feel that, in that silence, you begin to get that sense of that joy and that peace starts to come. And that's the stage that we're all moving into. And just beginning, so in other words, it's not, you don't have to think it's going to be this horrible struggle to the end. You begin to get some of that bliss and some of that joy in your heart that, even though you're struggling and you're going through your problems, and you can keep calling upon it, because that grace does come. And you can that grace will keep coming to you until, according to the continuum I'm describing in the book there, until, he says it's almost effortless. I can't say I've reached that point yet, but it does. It becomes almost effortless. And I know for those of us who saw Swami Kriyananda, our teacher in this life, founder of Ananda, towards the end of his life, we all saw it. He just had a bliss, a joy that he couldn't even contain it. It was so much welling up inside him, just that tears of joy. We're moving on that continuum. We're somewhere there. Don't give up. You always need to move forward. Otherwise, you move backwards. There is no standing still. So that's the key. It's understand. You have to keep moving forward. Put out the energy. Struggle like that butterfly, but then you emerge slowly but surely into that beautiful butterfly of eternity that you are. So let's take a moment now to reflect.
Whispers from Eternity. I have burnt my past, destroying every seed of evil destiny. I have stridden bravely through the strewn ashes of my past and future fears. I am the eternal now, having torn to shreds my enclosing cocoon of ignorance with the sharp knife of free will. Now I am thy soaring butterfly of eternity, flitting freely through immeasurable skies of time. The beauty of my wings I spread out through nature everywhere to entertain all beings. My wings are sprinkled with suns and stardust. Lo, I am beautiful, May every silken thread that shrouded my past folly be severed forever. See, they trail now behind me, only adding to my beauty as I wing my way to my own self in thee.